All right, function versus relation. Any relationship between two variables is called a relation, but not every relation is a function. In order for a relation to be a function, there can only be one dependent variable, which is typically your y, for every independent variable, which is typically your x. So in other words, every x value can only have one y. Or if it were in terms of a word problem and you had height and time is your independent variable, for every time there can only be one height. So that's the definition of a function. Now, in order for you to see if a relation is also a function, it depends on what you're given. If you're given a set of points, like the first two examples, you're really just checking to see, for every x, is there only one y? If there's only one set of y's, then it's a function. If there are multiple y values for a certain x, then that makes it only a relation. From the graph, you do something called a vertical line test, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's look at our first example of ordered pairs. So I'm going to check my x values to see if there's any overlap, because that will really tell me if I have to be worried about it not being a function. So my x's are 8, 6, 3, -5, -3. They're all different, which means each x only has one y value. So this is a function. Each x has only one y value. Let's look at the next one. My x values are 2, 6, 2 again, 3, and 8. So I'm a little bit worried right now about these coordinates. So I check the y coordinates, -4 and 5. So that means when x equals 2, there are 2 y values, which means this is not a function. It is only a relation. So that's from a set of ordered pairs. It's very visual. You just check your x's. Now, for a graph, you do something called a vertical line test. So if we just look at this first example, I will draw a vertical line anywhere down my graph. And I can do it multiple times. And as long as each line only hits your relation one time, it passes the vertical line test. Because if it's only hitting one time, that means that particular x value only has one y value. So this first example is a function for the same reason. Each x has only one y value. Now, it's not enough just to say it passes the vertical line test. You have to understand what the vertical line test means. It passes the vertical line test, meaning each x only has one y value. Now let's try the next one. I draw a vertical line. I hit 2 points. This is not a function, because the x values have multiple y values. Let's try some more. Now, these next two, or next three, have different segments. So you really have to be careful when you're doing your vertical line test to test the end points of each segment to see if there's overlap. So if I look on this first piece here, this line, I have no problem with it, but I have to be careful here. When I look at that jump, this is still okay for it to be a function, because this is a closed circle, this is open, which means when x equals -2, there is only one y value. So I'm okay with that. And then I follow this, and that's still passing my vertical line test, but then I have to be worried here. But again, that's a hole, that's a hole. Those values don't actually exist. The only one that it exists at x equals 3 is that y coordinate of 3. So that's still okay, it's still a function. And then if we just continue, it's a line, no overlap. So my vertical line test is passing everywhere on this function, and I checked specifically the endpoints of each segment. So yes, this is a function. Now let's look at the next one. I look at this first segment, and I'm okay with it. it's passing the vertical line test. I check the distinction here. There's a hole on top and a closed hole on the bottom, so that's okay. If I continue on this little curved part, I notice there's a point up here, but a hole down in the curve. That's still okay. I continue my shape and it's still following the definition of a function if I draw vertical lines. Now again, I could have a potential problem at this separation, but I don't because there's only one closed circle. I continue on my line. I have a random coordinate down below the x-axis, but it's okay because at that same point, there's an open hole in the line. So this is a function. And finally, the last one that has multiple segments, I follow my line, I have no problem here. But when I reach this point here, they're both closed circles. Even here, they're both closed circles. That means when x equals 0 or x equals 1, there are two y values. So this is not a function. This is not passing the vertical line test, and it's not passing the definition of a function. So this right here is only a relation. So something to remember, every single one of these examples, it was a relation, but some of them were functions because each x had only one y.